it's disheartening because we have a lot of work to do, especially when I see them outside, their hopelessness, helplessness, mental health issues, depression. We're talking about economics. They don't care about their lives. And so we as a people, we must begin to talk to these young brothers. We must be able to foster hope and give them encouragement so that they can try to get on the right road. So we thank you for that very extensive study. Let me ask you this question very quickly before we go to the next individual. In that study, how many African American youth were pooled?
So what we did, we didn't actually do the survey in this study. I will say that one of the things we want to do next is we want to try to get some funding so that we can work with young people themselves to help design and carry out a research project that tells more about themselves, right? But in this one, what we did is we pulled census data. And so there's two major sources of it, and they're built on the American Community Survey. So some of it, there's like the 1-year ones and the 5-year ones, so some of it is also predictive based on the sample. So it's meant to be representative. So it is a representative sampling, right? Some of it is 100%, like the actual census, and then the others of it is the sample survey.
Thank you very much. Once again, Ms. Teresa Cordova, thank you. At this time, I'm going to pass the mic to Ms. Dean Bennett, State Attorney and Legislative Counsel for American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois.
Thank you so much. How are y'all doing? Good. Awesome. So, as was said, my name is Kadeen Bennett. I work for the ACLU of Illinois, and I like to say that our clients are partly the Constitution. We work to ensure that folks are able to experience the Constitution fully, especially those rights that are in the Bill of Rights. And I have the honor of working with Representative Sims often, and he is a great advocate in Springfield, so we're lucky that he's the chair of the Judiciary Committee there. So at the ACLU, we do litigation and we do legislation, and we also do public education. And I wanted to talk about first some of the litigation we've done, or one piece of litigation that I think is appropriate tonight. So in March of last year, we issued a report, and we found that in Chicago, African Americans were stopped at 4 times the level as folks who were stopped in New York at the height of their stop and frisk issue. So African Americans are 32% of the population, and they were 72% of the people stopped. And we felt, the numbers spoke for themselves, that it was a problem. So we went to the city after they read the report, and we said that we could sue or you could settle. To the city's credit, they chose to settle, acknowledging that there was a problem and there needed to be a solution. So we entered an agreement with the city to really revise how the practice works. So before the settlement, there was no independent review of CPD policies and practices related to stop and frisks, including orders, training, discipline, data collected on stops. With the settlement, we have a former judge who will review the data, the policies, and all of the other documents and make recommended changes. So why is that important? Before, you could have a situation where there are 5 officers patrolling the same block. 4 of the officers have about 10 stops. 1 officer has 60 or 70 stops consistently. There wasn't really something official in place to really assess what was happening there. Did the officer need more training? Did the officer, was the officer profiling? Were the stops justifiable? So now there's an independent person who's able to review that. Before there was no, I think ACLU data collection is pretty important for us, because if you have the data, then you know whether or not there's a problem. We also know whether or not things are getting better. So before the settlement, there wasn't any record of stop when it led to an arrest or a ticket, and there was no record of any time somebody was frisked. After the settlement, now all stops and frisks have to be entered into an electronic database as it applies to Chicago. And then data is going to be provided to both the ACLU and the monitor every month, so we can see where the stops are. On top of that, one of the cool things about working at the ACLU is that we have an integrated advocacy approach. So there's litigation and there's also legislation. while the conversations were happening around the settlement with CPD, we were also working with Representative Sims on the law enforcement omnibus bill. And one of the really important things for us was to have data collection of stops and frisks in the bill. So we wanted all across the state for that information to be collected. So now, because of Representative Sims' bill, officers have to record any stops that result in a frisk or an arrest. And they must record data on all of these frisks. So before, no recording, now it's going to be recorded. Before, there was no data that was released except through FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. And the data collection that was done was really incomplete. Now, this independent magistrate judge is going to issue public reports twice a year to let folks know what's happening. So the reports would have statistical information and then conclusions of the experts that will be working with Judge Keys. And there's more data that will now be available through the Freedom of Information Act. And we understand at the ACLU that not everyone can access FOIA. It's a really complicated system. So we're more than open if folks are interested in doing FOIAs or making FOIA requests and helping with that process. The other thing is around training. So according to one of the FOIAs we did in the past, no officers have received training on how to constitutionally conduct a stop since 2010. And from our perspective, that's a long time. You have new officers coming in, and having ongoing training is really important. So now there are going to be general orders about when a stop and a frisk is legal, and there's going to be revised training that's happening in March of 2016. And then on top of that, as Representative Sims talked about before, there's now going to be training across the state on things like search and seizures, implicit bias, racial sensitivity, which we think is really important. And it's ongoing training. It's not just training when you go to the academy and then it's done. That ongoing training is a really, really critical component, not just for individuals who live in the state, but also for the officers so that they could make sure that they know the latest and greatest of information. And then there is an additional check. Before, CPD supervisors were required to review stops, reports on individual stops, but from our perspective, it was really ineffective because not only did we see how many African Americans were stopped, and it seemed to be a disproportionate number compared to how many people lived in Chicago, but the other issue is that the stops weren't always justified. A lot of them were not justified. So you can't just stop someone just because. You have to have reasonable suspicion, and we found that a lot of the stops we saw didn't meet that criteria. So now officers who engage in unlawful stops and frisks will receive documented retraining, enhanced supervision, or discipline. So it's a progressionary approach. And we think that retraining is important, but we think if you can't be retrained, then there needs to be other steps in place. And then one of the other important things around Representative Sims' legislation is that every time somebody is stopped and frisked, they get a receipt. The receipt would have the officer's name and the date. And it's really important because in doing Know Your Rights trainings across Chicago, we've talked to a lot of young people, especially young men, the same age range as the folks who don't have jobs. And they're saying, we're getting stopped all the time and we've done nothing wrong. Nothing was found in us. We try to make a complaint, does it really matter? Nobody believes us. So now there's the opportunity, if you get stopped every day for a month, you have a stack of receipts. So when you make a complaint, you can say, my word, and here's proof. One of the things we've heard before is the complaint process. Is it really worth it to make a complaint? Will anything happen? And I think one thing we're slightly excited about with the settlement is that now, for the first time, we have this independent person who's actually going to be reviewing those complaints. So we actually will encourage people now to make complaints because if you don't say anything, this judge won't see it when he's reviewing the paperwork. So that's one thing we're really excited about, the law, the settlement, and we are really looking to let people know that it exists. So if it's not working, there's the opportunity to retweak. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is criminal justice reform. We did this poll recently in Illinois, mostly Chicago and the suburbs around, and we were asking folks about the criminal justice system. And the thing that we found was that 74% say the system is broken. These are Republicans. It was 70% of Republicans, 74% independents, and 76% of Democrats. This system that we funnel people into, that we pay a lot of money to keep people there, a lot of people acknowledge it's broken. And the thing that we find is that there are too many people in prison for too long periods of time, and while they're there, it's not like they're getting education or job training or anything that makes them productive citizens when they go back home. Because even though they're there for a long time, most of them eventually go back home. So one of the things that we were very excited about our governor is that he was all for criminal justice reform. He believed that, prison should be a place where your soul is tortured. It should be a place where people go in, they come out, and not go in for very long. We were especially excited that Representative Sims was on this governor's commission. There are legislators, other policymakers, educators, a wide range of folks. And we hold out hope that there will be something good that comes out of the commission. The thing that's hard right now is that you may know our state doesn't have a budget right now. That's been the case for a long time, and a lot of the agencies that would actually help with criminal justice reform are closing their doors. So when we're talking about diverting people, it's hard to divert them if that organization or agency no longer exists, or they've cut their time to half time. It's really hard to think about, when people get out, giving them the tools, when a lot of the organizations that would provide those tools, those reentry tools, they're also potentially going out of business. So we're really hoping that there will be a budget soon. In terms of reform ideas, one of the things that we've worked on for the last couple of sessions was a bill that would decriminalize low-level pot possession. In our survey, when we were talking to people about pot, it was like, we don't think people should be in jail for carrying small amounts of pot. That was something that we tried to get a bill that was up to 15 grams, fine of no more than $125. Unfortunately, our governor did an mandatory veto, lowering the amount to 10 grams and raising the fine to $200. I hope that's not where he will be in terms of reform, because I think we wanted him to be a bit bolder. In terms of other things that we're looking at pushing and supporting is a bill that would make possession of 1 gram of any drug misdemeanor as opposed to a felony, because we don't think that people should have a felony record for that low level of drug possession. It's a non-violent offense. It's something that I think the mayor even talked about, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, so we hope that that's something that can move. And we really want to overhaul drug sentencing generally. I mean, in Springfield, when I first started, I would go to these judiciary meetings, and it was legislators never heard of an enhancement they didn't like. It was, 3 strikes? Yeah. You want to add 10 more years to this because you heard fill in the blank? It wasn't about what's the best way to prevent crime. It was, let's just keep it in there for longer because we really don't care. And it was, a lot of it was political. So we're hoping that in Springfield, there will be a lot of pulling back of these enhancements, because what we know is that it doesn't make people safer to have people in jail for a longer period of time where they're not getting any kind of education or treatment or skills when they're there. Finally, one of the things that's really important to us is with all of the violence that's been happening in Chicago, a lot of shootings, one of the things we keep hearing is, well, let's just get tasers, because tasers will make everything better. And we are concerned about that because we do think that a taser can be used in a way that is like deadly force. There are people who have died because of officers using tasers on them. So one of the things we really want to see is a standard for when tasers could be used. They're kind of like body cams, in our opinion, where we think body cams can be a helpful tool, but they're not the problem solver. In the same way, we think tasers could be a helpful tool, but they don't solve the problem. So I'll stop there. Sorry for talking so fast, I can't help it. Thank you.
Before you go out, I have to do this. I have to thank Kadeen and the ACLU. They are wonderful partners in Springfield, and it's very difficult when you're fighting for challenges and issues that other people don't necessarily find to be, for lack of a better term, sexy. They don't find them to be causes that are that deserve attention. But the ACLU
they stayed in that gap, and I want to publicly thank Kadeen for her hard work. Under some very challenging circumstances, and oftentimes, but to really stand there and work hard and advocate on behalf of the people who don't have a voice. So thank you, Kadeen. Absolutely.
Thanks again. Question I had, did you say, if I heard you correctly, that African American males are pulled over for